Hello, my name is Eric, and this is actually my first video, and it's my 40th birthday. I am 40 years old today, 40. I was born January 22nd, 1986, and today is January 22nd, 2026. So, 40 years. I've lived a very philosophical life, and I think today has been a day of contemplation, a day of recalling the life that I've led so far, and what's going to come the second half of life, and maybe what I have to contribute, what I have to give to other people. And I think a big part of that is why I am starting my channel today, is because I have lived a life of contemplation, a life of a lot of thought, a lot of philosophy, asking myself a lot of questions that uh, I think are very important, even if people on average don't seem to agree that this kind of stuff is important. But I do. And I would like to share a lot of that with you guys. So we're starting today. And I think today what I want to talk about is maybe some of the events in my life that have shaped my views and shaped my just lifestyle, really, and maybe even my personality and everything that there is about being me. And then I will get into talking a little bit about meaning and purpose, and and really we're going to talk about nihilism and uh, why meaning and purpose means something so different today than it did to the people of the past. So first, I'd like to start by recalling an event in my life, maybe the most significant thing that happened to me. Um, and that's saying a lot because I've also been like homeless, like living in a tent for years at a time, back in my 20s. Um, so other very significant things have happened to me. So it's to say that this is the most or maybe second most significant thing that's happened to me, uh, which is to say how I lost my childhood religion. And I'm going to tell the story here in a minute. Uh, that's saying a lot. It's saying a lot because I've lived quite an eventful life. I've done a lot of things that no one else has done. I've hitchhiked across the country, and I've camped only a few feet away from wild sea lions. I've climbed a mountain in Alaska, even though that's kind of overstating it. And I've done a lot of cool and interesting things in my life, but maybe the story of how I lost my childhood religion is maybe the most significant, if not the second most significant, because I got something maybe I'll share later uh, about 5-MeO DMT. Like that's I think anyone that has done 5-MeO DMT will immediately go, okay, yeah, that's that's a very significant event in your life. Um, but let's set that one aside. Maybe that'll be another video another time. But for now, I'd like to tell the story of how I lost my childhood religion. I actually have a lot of fun when I tell this story. I like telling it. It's it's a fun story, and it begins when I was about 11 years old. And I grew up in South Bend, Indiana, which is a pretty typical Midwestern small city. And I grew up in sort of a very middle class neighborhood. Yeah, we had a 3-story house, or really 2 stories with a basement, and we lived next to this lady who was a single mother who was very, very religious. And by very religious, I mean like we're not going to tithe 10%, we're going to tithe 20%, and Jesus channel going 24/7 in her house, and crucifixes all along the wall, and the kids are not allowed to watch anything but Veggie Tales. Very, very religious woman. Now, my mother, being a Midwestern housewife, or actually, I think she might have begun her career in nursing at this point. I can't remember. But, anyways, like being a mother, and, you know, I'm sure my mom had a lot to complain about. And so the next door lady would come over and just have chats with my mom, and I'm sure they complained about the kids, and I can already see the scene. I know she was complaining. That's what I envisioned. And I think after uh, enough of my mom's complaining, after she had complained about husband and kids and all this for long enough, I think the neighbor lady got the idea that, hey, I know what's wrong here and I know the solution. And so, when she brought this to my mom, hey, I know what's going on here, and like I know what's wrong with your kid Eric, me, and and I could just picture my mother being like, ugh, okay, let's hear it. What do you got? Well, what this lady told her was, Eric is possessed by a demon. And again, I can just envision my mom going, oh my God. Okay, okay, what's the solution? What do you got? And this lady told my mom, well, Benny Hinn is coming to town in 2 weeks, and I got tickets to go or whatever she needed to go, and I'll take Eric, and Benny Hinn will get the demon out of him. Now, if you don't know who Benny Hinn is, you might have to Google him. He was like a preacher, like a televangelist uh, back in the day. I think he's probably passed away by now. I'm not 100% sure, but I would think so. And he used to be really famous for doing like the lay on hands. In fact, he wouldn't just do the lay on hands. He would like whip people with his coat. Okay, very theatrical. Very very uh, yeah, theatrical. Theatrical is the word. And so I once again envision my mom going, "Oh my God, okay, okay, I'll try anything. Sure, go for it. Take him to see Benny Hinn, but I'm not going to force him. You're going to have to talk to him first and ask him, and I'm not going to force him to go." So they approached me and asked me, "Hey, would you like to go to Benny Hinn? We think you're, or not we, the neighbor lady thinks you're possessed by a demon." And actually, I believe she was the one that approached me and asked me, "I think you're possessed by a demon. If we go to Benny Hinn, we can get the demon out of you." And now here I am at like 11 years old, 12 years old or so, and I'm thinking, hold on. So you're saying I have a demon, and we're going to go to this church, and they're going to like do something, and there's going to be like music in the background, and like the evil spirit is going to fly out of me, and there's going to be like men with brooms trying to keep it out of the curtains, and old ladies screaming, and the most badass guitar riff as Satan comes out of the ground to reclaim his lost servant. Like, that's what this sounds like to me. Yeah, I'll go to this. That's the most metal thing I've ever heard. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so a couple weeks later, the day comes, and we go to this church, and it's like a mega church. And by mega church, I mean like 5,000 people or something like that. It's enormous. It's basically a miniature stadium, or like probably the size of a basketball court, like a small basket. No, maybe like a full size basketball court. I don't know how many people a basketball court seats, but I would imagine it's probably somewhere around 5 or 10,000. I don't know, but that was how many this church seated. It was huge. And well, we have bleeder seats. We're like all the way up there. Now, unfortunately, this is Indiana, and it's the summertime, and it's like 90 degrees, and Indiana is usually pretty humid, so it's sweltering heat. It's very uncomfortable. We're not having fun. We're sweating, and you got 5,000 people all in the same room, so that adds to it. It's not pleasant. Well, at first it was kind of just the usual preaching and praying, people stomping their feet, clapping their hands, singing songs, and then you get Benny Hinn up there preaching for half an hour on I don't remember the actual content, but I don't remember it being all that different than most content in a Protestant church. And one thing I do remember though is this guy asked for donations like all the time. Like every 10 minutes he was asking for money to get his ministry going in Africa, and then he needed to get his ministry going in Asia, and he just needed money for this and that and the other, just to preach God everywhere. So I do remember that, but otherwise it was pretty just normal content for a Protestant church. Well, after a while, after a couple hours of this, now the main event started, the lay on hands. And they asked everyone basically to get in a line. Well, there was sort of like the main room of this church, but then around the outside of the church was like a very large and long hallway. And so everyone's kind of crowded into this hallway because, the hallway is basically the line to get up there. And now I got to thinking already, like, I don't know how the CDC doesn't shut this down because it's like, do you want a new plague? Because touching every single person that comes through there, that's how you get a new plague. at least if you ask me, that seems like a good way to get it. Well, anyways, we're out in this hallway now. And again, it's sweltering heat. We're not having a good time as far as temperature comfort. But 11-year-old me seems to see some very curious sights out in this hallway. For example, there is a person off to the side, and he's like, "Shama lama inge ala yama yama kama lama yam," and now a lot of like you Pentecostals and whatnot are probably know exactly what I'm talking about here, but 11-year-old me, I have no idea. I've never seen anything like this. My mother basically maybe took us to a you know Methodist or Baptist uh, sermon on Easter once every 2 years or so. I'd never seen anything like this, and so I asked my chaperone, the lady next door, "What's going on? That's kind of weird." And she explained to me, "Well, this man is talking in tongues." Well, what does that mean? Well, it means he's speaking like a dead language. God has given him the ability to speak and understand a dead language temporarily. So he's speaking this dead language. And I told her, well, it just sounds like gibberish to me. Whoo, wrong answer. Wrong answer. Bad answer. Oh, you do not speak of the works of the Lord with such disdain. You apologize to Jesus right now. Right now. You don't speak of the works of the Lord in that way. Sorry. I didn't mean to offend anyone. I'm sorry, Jesus. like, like 11-year-old me, I'm just being honest, right? Like I'm just curious and honest. But oh no. That wasn't good. You don't speak of the works of the Lord with any sort of negativity, I guess. Well, so after profusely apologizing and getting through this line that seemed to take forever because of the heat, we finally get up to the main stage. And of course they really got it, like they got the whole visual down because if I remember right, the stage is maybe I don't know. It was raised a few inches off the floor, and so you're looking up at Benny Hinn, like you're looking up at him, and there's like bright lights behind him. Because they got all the stage lighting, kind of like I got. which by the way, for any new streamers, lighting takes a while to learn. Not easy. but anyways, so I'm looking up at this guy, and there's like these bright lights, right? And I'm getting excited, like this is the moment, right? Like we're gonna see some action. And obviously, my neighbor is like my chaperone, and Benny Hinn turns to her, and he says, "What is this child's affliction?" And my neighbor is just eating this up. This is like one of her heroes, right? Oh my God, Benny, he he has a demon inside of him, Benny. You have to do something. You have to get the demon out of him. He has a demon. And then Benny Hinn makes the most hyperbolic gesture I've ever seen a human being contort their body into making. Did you hear that, everyone? Did you hear that? This boy has a demon inside of him, and we will not abide the servants of Satan to abide in our midst. So I say to you now, demon, be gone. And he raised up his hand. And this is when everything, oh man, I'm excited. I'm looking up at him, oh, with my stupid grin. And oh man, there's gonna be an evil spirit flying out of me, and guys are gonna have brooms trying to keep it out of the curtains, and old ladies are gonna scream, and 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 then Satan's gonna appear, and I don't think there's gonna be a metal band, because there is a band, but they don't appear to be a metal band, but you know, so maybe skip that part. But still, they're gonna rock out for a minute, and Satan's gonna appear, and everyone's gonna boo, and then he's gonna reclaim his lost servant. Like, this is gonna be so awesome. I'm so excited. Betty Hinn reaches back with his hand and smacks me on the forehead. And I just look at him. With my dumb expression. And that's when I had my first religious revelation. My first one. Oh my God. These people are full of shit. They're full of shit. In fact, I even realized, oh my God, it's not just these people. These people are just like the worst. Everyone is full of shit. Everyone. My parents, teachers, the news. Everyone is wrong about everything all the time. So in a way, I guess you could say I did get a demon out of me. I did have a religious revelation in this moment, but that's not how it's supposed to look. When they touch you on the forehead, you're supposed to fall backwards. There's like a volunteer behind you to catch you. Yeah, and I just stayed there. and this is not a place to have like actual revelations. Okay, that's not what you're supposed to have. You're supposed to have the revelation that they want you to have, like this emotional something. And so the show must go on. And this big dumb expression I'm giving is just not. It won't do. So he reaches up his hand again. I said, demon, be gone. And this time he pushes me backwards into the volunteer. It kind of surprises me a little. Excuse me. This kind of surprises me a little bit, like to be pushed. And that's when I have my second revelation. Oh, they're full of shit, and they'll push a child. They will hurt you if they will physically move you around. This is like the most minor form of it, but they will hurt you if you fuck with their worldview too much. So this is the moment I lost my childhood religion. This was the moment. I realized that everyone is completely full of crap, and myself included. Okay, I'm not saying I'm not included in that list. Um, I think this was sort of my Socrates moment. Not to compare myself with Socrates or anything, but it's a similar, it's sort of a similar moment, a similar realization, because when famously when the oracle, oh, I'm sorry, I'm messing up the story. Um, the oracle at Delphi told Socrates that he's the wisest man in all the land. And when someone asked him why are you the wisest man? And it's because Socrates basically replied, because I know that I know nothing. And the entire story of Socrates in what he did back in ancient Athens is that he would go around asking people how they knew things. How do you know what justice is? How do you know what holiness is? How do you know these things? And he would ask questions that basically exposed people for not really knowing anything at all, that they really didn't know what they were talking about. And it's not that Socrates had any special knowledge, it's just that Socrates knew that he didn't. And I think this was kind of the moment that I had when I lost my childhood religion. is I just realized everyone is no one knows anything, least of all me. And since then, I'd like to think that I like if someone asked me seriously what I know, like I might go and claim that I know about how you know some basic astronomy, or I might know what's going on in politics today or something. Like in less serious moments, I might talk about knowing some more mundane things. But if someone's going to seriously ask me what I know even less than I did in that moment. Um, I only know one thing. There's only one thing I think is that's even possible to know, and that's that consciousness exists. Consciousness is everything. Consciousness is all. We'll definitely be talking about that on this channel, probably quite a bit. But I'll set it aside for now. Anything else, if you're asking me seriously what I don't know anything else but that. Um, well, I guess maybe the knowledge that that's all I know is maybe another another little bit of knowledge. But besides that, I wouldn't say that there's anything else I do know. There's been a sort of a long journey I've undertaken to shed myself of all the things that I thought I know, and I would uh, loosely call that journey the journey of philosophy. And I don't I don't know if no, I'm pretty sure a lot of philosophers would not agree with that view. A lot of people who call themselves philosophers. But that's sort of what philosophy has been for me is the shedding of views, the shedding of what I think I know. I'll be talking a lot about that on this channel, a lot. In fact, a lot of what I want to do is I have a lot of ideas for the content of this channel, and you should definitely subscribe if any of this sounds like it's up your alley. But right now, I think there's three sorts of content that I do want to do. First is I think is maybe going to be a daily thing since it's sort of low hanging fruit, easy to do, lower effort, and that's going to be just sort of your standard reaction content. I might take like what's happening in the news, or I might just find posts on the internet that are maybe philosophy related or maybe news related, and react to them. Except what I'm going to be focusing a lot in my React content will be the structure of arguments. Like, what argument are these people making? And I might even examine some of the rhetorical features in that vein. Like, and by rhetorical features, I don't just mean like linguistic or language oriented rhetorical features. I might examine like how is the photography set up to deliver a message. Like what message are they trying to express with this? And then what we'll do is we'll examine the argument that's being made in these things and see if the argument really holds up to proper scrutiny. And I think what we're probably going to find, I'm going to try to be very fair. I'm not going to try to arrive at this conclusion all the time, but I'm pretty sure that most of the time we're going to find that it doesn't matter whether it's left wing, right wing, center, anything. Um, there are almost no opinions that I think are going to really hold up to any sort of proper scrutiny. I think we are living in an age. Actually, I don't even know if it's the age. I'm not sure that this has ever been different throughout history, to be honest. Um, but it's definitely the case, at least nowadays, that uh, almost all the content, almost all the information that's out there is sort of it's slop. It's it's not properly justified. They're just pushing an agenda. They're pushing an ideology. They're pushing a conclusion they want you to reach. And I don't think anyone's out there really examining anything or really. It's not even about teaching people how to think. It's just like actually applying how to think for themselves. I don't think anyone's really doing it. So I think the reaction content I do will probably be in that vein, uh, reacting and analyzing the arguments that are being made. But another type of content I want to do is going to have to do with some of the books that are behind me here. I might just do like series where I just read the primary sources of various philosophers. I think this would also be probably relatively easy content. I could probably do it daily, uh, because it's just cracking open a book and reading and maybe explaining what the author is trying to say here, adding some context. Uh, it'd probably be a little more involved because I might have to do some research ahead of time for the readings that I'm doing. Because there might be like historical context or something like that that's important to understanding the passage, and I might not always have that context myself, even though I'm, relatively educated on the history of philosophy. I certainly do not know all the details. So I think that would be another interesting type of content for people that are maybe a little more involved. And then the last type will probably be content that's a lot more long form, or a lot more involved, I guess you could say. And this is where I might just make like actual philosophical arguments, like wholesale, for uh, almost like I don't know if it'll be with the rigor of an academic paper or not, but the intent would certainly be a lot more rigorous to actually make arguments of my own. So I'll probably do all three types of these content. The last type of content, by the way, is not low hanging fruit. It is not daily content. That would be something that's like maybe every 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm probably being pretty optimistic with that estimate. Now today, I actually do have something. It is maybe on the more long form part of things, and it is um, examining meaning, meaning and purpose. And pull up my notes here. Excuse me. And what I want to talk about is uh, basically like how nihilism became possible in the first place. Like, what were the conditions for for this sort of modern nihilistic age where we don't really, as a people, we don't really buy into the idea of objective meaning or objective purpose much anymore. That's not to say that some people don't. Some people certainly do, but it used to be that it it used to be pretty much everyone did, or at least in Christian Europe, which is kind of where I'm going to be focusing my analysis, given that's the cultural heritage of the United States, and that's the culture I grew up in. So I'm kind of examining the cultural background. I think most of my viewers will probably have, and that I certainly have, and the philosophical context around that, and why purpose and meaning was something that was it was almost impossible not to have back in the day. Whereas today we're just way more skeptical of the concept, and entire schools of philosophy of existentialism and whatnot have been created to address the problem of nihilism. So I think it starts really with Plato, and the turning point that things really start to flip is a medieval philosopher by the name of William of Ockham. Now, you're probably familiar with William of Ockham as far as the idea of Occam's razor. That's where most people are familiar with Occam. But who Occam was responding to was Plato, like the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. Uh, and I think I have to pretty much do like maybe a short, like a very abbreviated history of Western philosophy, uh, starting with Plato and maybe going up to Nietzsche, who's the most famous philosopher that talks about nihilism. So I'm gonna do like a short history here, uh, to sort of explain explain this idea I have of objective meaning and purpose being like just a given back in the day, whereas today it's not. Okay, so Plato, you cannot understate. Um, I'm sorry, you cannot overstate the influence of Plato. Plato is probably the most influential philosopher that has ever lived, at least here in the West. Um, shoot, maybe of all time, just anywhere really. And Plato was certainly the intellectual architect of all the ages prior to William of Ockham. Um, in really the late medieval ages, Aristotle started really coming back into the picture, but everyone was still definitely reacting to Platonic philosophy, or Neoplatonism, back in this day. Uh, so Plato wrote on quite a variety of issues mostly through his dialogues of Socrates, which are thought to be actual dialogues that the man Socrates would have had, but also Plato added some of his own stuff in books like the Republic. But probably the biggest issue, probably the single most important issue of Plato's philosophy is his idea of the forms. Now, this is maybe a very odd sounding uh, idea to the modern ears, uh, but you got to keep in mind this was the most influential idea in the world for 1800 years. I'm not kidding. Like 1800 years, this was the most influential idea in the entire world, even if it sounds a little weird today. So Plato's idea of the forms, what a form is it's the perfect representation of an abstract idea. I often give the example of catness. Like the form of a cat is the absolute perfect representation of what being a cat is all about. So you take all the cats in the world, all the house cats, all the big cats, and you distill down. I'm trying to avoid using the word essence because essentialism is Aristotle's version of all this. Okay, that's an actual philosophy. That's something a little different. But if it helps you kind of think of it in those terms, the the form of a cat is the perfect example. You take all the individual cats and you create this one abstract idea of what it means to be a cat, the essence of being a cat. And that's what the form of a cat is. Except for Plato, the form, all the forms, not just the form of cats, but all the forms, lived in a place called Plato's heaven, which was a whole other plane of existence, a higher plane of existence than the one we're on. And this was the place where all the abstract ideas lived. The essence of what it means to be an elephant, the form of an elephant, the form of justice, the form of cats. All of them lived in Plato's heaven on this other form of existence. And while it is our eyes that can see this realm and our ears that hear this realm, for Plato it was our minds that would see into the realm of the forms. And so what Plato thought is that a thought in your mind was your mind seeing these abstractions on another plane of existence, seeing the essence of catness, or seeing the essence of elephantness, or justice, or even goodness. What and this gets a little, maybe even a little more complicated here. What Plato thought was that what each individual cat was an emanation of the form of cats. Like the form of cats would beam itself out into the world, out into our world. And when it beamed itself out into our world, that's what formed all the individual actual cats that we would see. So you got this perfect representation of a cat. Another way to think about it would be more maybe like the Greek gods or Norse gods. That like you have uh, like with the Roman gods, it'd be like Mars is the god of war and Jupiter is the head of the gods, and you have the goddess of fertility. You have like all the different spirits, all the different gods represented certain aspects of the world, certain things in the world. That's kind of what the forms are. There was a god of cats in a way, but it's not a personality. That's the other thing about it. So it's not a god like it has a personality. It's just It's the abstract idea on another plane of existence. Well, Plato thought what gave each individual cat its existence was the form of the cats, the perfect representation of cats beaming itself into our world. And same thing with anything, elephants, people, or even abstract ideas like justice. Now, like I said, this is probably quite strange, maybe difficult to grasp because it's just such an alien idea to the modern day. Um, but it kind of does make sense if you think about the sort of culture that the ancient civilizations lived under. These were very polytheistic cultures. You know, the Greeks and the Norse all had this pantheon of gods, um, and so it's kind of like Plato's forms are more or less the non-personal version of polytheism. That's maybe the best way I have to uh, give a visual or sort of explain this. Now, in having this view, Plato was perhaps the first realist, ontological realist. Now, what a realist is in this case is someone that believes that abstractions, like justice or all the set of all cats, are real things. Now, this isn't to be confused in philosophy with the idea of epistemological realism. Epistemological realism is probably what you're more familiar with. It's usually contrasted with idealism, and it's the argument that the external world exists. There is a real world. The most common form of this nowadays among people seems to be materialism, which is to say only the material world exists, and consciousness can be reduced to neurons firing in the brain or something in that vein. That's epistemological realism. This is not epistemological realism. This is ontological realism. This is to say abstractions are real. That's what Plato believed. That, you know, they're real things that exist on another plane of existence. Uh, in today's world, a lot of mathematicians maintain this point of view of ontological realism because they believe numbers are real. Well, numbers are just an abstraction. You know, they're no different than the idea of justice in that sense. Like this microphone or the table here or whatever. Like these are obvious material objects, and like I said, epistemological realism would argue that these are real objects. You know, the material objects. But numbers are kind of like like I said, the idea of justice or the set of all cats or the set of all elephants, the set of all people, the set of all hands. Like these sets are abstract objects. They're not real in the same sense the table is, or not as obviously. But to ontological realists, they still are very real things. And Plato is certainly the most famous ontological realist. Uh, Now, Aristotle would probably be the other ontological realist, the next most famous. And this is because um, Aristotle is also probably the first challenge to Plato's ideas. Whereas Plato believed that the forms existed in a separate plane of existence, in you know Plato's heaven is what we call it, that is only accessible by the mind. Aristotle believed that the form of everything existed within the object itself. And this is what we mean by the essence of things. It's called Aristotelian essentialism. So when you see a cat, according to Aristotle, the essence of catness lives inside of that cat. It's inside the cat. And if you see another cat, the same exact essence of catness lives inside that cat as well. It's the same essence because all cats have the same essence. It's what makes them cats, according to Aristotle. Uh, they do not live on another plane of existence, like is what Plato believed. That would be Platonism. Now we're not going to talk too much about Aristotle here because Plato had a much longer, much broader influence. Um, Even today, most of Aristotle's writings have never been recovered. Only about a third of Aristotle's writings remain available to us. About two-thirds are lost. But for most of European history, Aristotle was just lost altogether. It was the Arab Muslim world that maintained Aristotle, and in fact, the medieval philosophers in the Muslim world were extremely influenced by by Aristotle because they had maintained his writings. And it wasn't until the Crusades brought Aristotle back into Christian Europe, and then he was translated into Latin because most of the scholars and philosophers uh, of Europe in that day um, did not. I don't think they read Greek. uh, Someone might have to correct me on that, but I think most of them just knew Latin. And so after Aristotle was brought back to Christian Europe and translated into Latin, well, then you get the figures of the scholastic movement, um, which culminated perhaps in the personality of St. Thomas Aquinas, who even calls Aristotle the philosopher. That's how influenced he was over Aristotle. But for 1800 years, Plato's view has just held just absolute dominance, um, including into the work of Neoplatonism, which just means new Plato, basically. Of whom the best known philosopher is going to be Plotinus, the third in the third wave of Neoplatonism. Now, Neoplatonism is quite sophisticated and complex overall, and the only YouTube video that I have appeared in before this one was actually I was a guest um, on an Orthodox Christian on his channel, and I was just learning about Neoplatonism at that time, and he invited me on to talk about Neoplatonism, and I'm afraid I probably didn't have that much to contribute, and I don't remember everything that I said during that interview, but I remember kind of being a little disappointed in myself for not really bringing a lot to it. Uh, but since then, I'm a little more educated on it. I'm no expert, but I know enough to know that it's very sophisticated. It's very complex. There's a lot going on, but there is an idea to focus on here, which is the idea of the one. Um, Now, Plato believed that each individual instance of something, like if we're going to continue with catness, we're talking about each individual cat. Plato believed that each individual instance was sort of like a shadow cast by the perfect form, or it's like I said, an emanation. But each individual instance is an imperfect representation of the perfect. Like each form is like it's the perfect cat, the perfect elephant, the perfect man or woman. Whereas each individual instance of it is an imperfect shadow, I guess you could say. But Plotinus took this one step further because then the question became, okay, so we have all these different forms now. Are they some sort of imperfect representation of another form? And uh, to Plotinus, the answer, and I believe most of the Neoplatonists, the answer to this was absolutely yes, of course. Just like each individual cat is represented by the form of catness, and it's the form of catness that emanates itself into our world to create each individual cat. The forms themselves have like a master form that emanates each of them, and this master form is on an even higher plane of existence. And the only thing you can say about this master form is that it is one. And if you think about it for a minute, that this actually makes sense. Um, that if you're going to have this idea, that's all you could say about it, because as soon as you divide it, into into like different attributes and whatnot, well then you need to have another form above it to create each individual instance again. So what Plotinus is basically uh, and the Neoplatonists basically are getting at here is that even abstractions, which hope to generalize something, in fact, I believe that was the word that Plato basically used was the general form or I don't remember exactly. but it's something like that. Abstraction is, I think, a more modern way of thinking about it, if I remember right. Um, but the idea behind it is like you have individual instances of cats, and you generalize what's common among all cats, and that's what gives you the abstraction, the abstract form of a cat. Well, now you abstract over all the forms themselves. Each individual form becomes an individual instance. And what do you get when you have take all those in common? Well, you get the most general abstraction, the abstract of all abstractions. And all you can say about it is one. Because if you try to say anything else about it, you are introducing a multiplicity, and therefore you are introducing a bunch of individual instances again. Well, that won't do. so so all you can say about it is the one. Well, this idea had a lot of influence on the early Christian church. Like, um, yeah, like you can't understate just how much of a I, I did again, didn't I? You can't overstate how much of an influence Neoplatonism had on the early church. Man, I just don't know the difference between understating and overstating, do I? Sheesh. Well, I might even go so far as to say that Neoplatonism had almost as much influence on the early church as the Gospels. Okay, it was that influential on the early church. I mean, some of this had to do with the fact that there was really no official church canon until the Council of Nicaea, but uh, that's neither here nor there. The point is, Neoplatonism was very influential. So, um, everything I'm kind of saying so far is kind of to get to this point that the church identified this idea of the one with the Godhead of Christianity. Like they were sort of synonymous to the early church. Um, all of creation to the early church emanated from the one in this sort of hierarchical fashion of I mean, I'm not going to get into all the different levels of Neoplatonism, but the basic idea is you have the one which emanates the forms, and then the forms which emanate each individual instance um, within our the world that we see and hear and you know have contact with our senses. Uh, okay, so at this point you might be thinking like what in the world does this have to do with nihilism and today's present age of missing meaning and purpose? I need a drink. Excuse me 1 second. Doing all this talking makes the throat dry. Okay, so you might be thinking, why is all this relevant? Well, the point of all this is that meaningless, like nihilism cannot enter the Platonic worldview. It's wholly unfamiliar to the Platonic worldview. So, like, not only did cats and boulders and elephants and justice, um, not only did all these have the perfect form, but so did a very abstract idea like meaning or purpose. Just like justice being a very very abstract concept, um, there's no justice objects out here in the world that we could point to and say are emanations um, of the form of justice. There's like maybe symbols of justice, like the um, blind lady holding the scales. So we have maybe symbols of justice, and we might have acts of justice. We might have words that describe justice, but there's no like justice object like my water bottle here. The form of water bottles would be emanating this water bottle into existence, but there's no object like that with justice. That's why it's an abstract idea. Well, it's the same way with purpose and meaning. They're abstract ideas. There's no meaning object out here in the world that you can point to and say, "Hey, look over there. There goes a meaning. There goes a purpose." Well, no, it doesn't work that way, right? They're abstractions. But the important thing to note in the Platonic worldview is that abstractions have just as much reality as tables and trees and cats and chairs in the Platonic worldview. So they're numbers. The numbers are maybe the most famous example because mathematicians are um, generally tend to be Platonists, very strongly so. Uh, Now, this brings up an interesting idea. Like you're going to have to put yourself into the mindset of someone who believes the Platonic worldview, because it's not a lot of people believe this nowadays. It's largely like I said, it's largely just mathematicians and the Orthodox Church who tend to support this way of thinking, whereas just about everyone else, um, at least in the Western world, has sort of moved on to other ways of thinking. So it's not common, but put yourself into thinking like this for a moment. Let's say, let's take something concrete to illustrate the example. Say you wanted to learn about fish. Okay, you don't know much about fish, but you want to learn. So what you do is you make an objective study of fish. You might start perhaps by reading a book on fish, or maybe catching a fish and dissecting it to learn where all of its organs are. If you wanted to learn more about fish, maybe you'd ask a scientist about fish, or some other learned person about fish. Or if we're going to put ourselves back and say the medieval times, you might ask a wise man, or maybe just a fisherman about fish. Now, the thing is, in the Platonic worldview, is there's really no difference between a fish and between something like meaning or purpose. These are both objectively real things, and so uh, and so because there's no difference in the ontology and the realness of these two things, if you wanted to know what your purpose was, or know what the meaning of your life is, you would do the exact same thing as you would when you wanted to learn more about fish. You would study such a thing. And so what you would do is you would make the objective study by maybe reading a book on purpose, such as, the Bible. That'd probably be the most common go-to back then uh, for studying the objective purpose of something, or the objective meaning. So you might read about it, read about purpose and meaning in a book like the Bible. Or you might consult a priest, or some other learned wise man about what your purpose is. Or lastly, maybe you just do some raw observation, like you would with a fish. You can observe what kind of fish swim in that stream or that pond by just going and looking. Well, you might observe other human beings and what they're doing to learn the meaning and purpose of your life. So you were born. You're the son of a peasant who works the fields, and you might study the people around you who are all peasants. They work the fields, and you might conclude that your purpose and meaning in life is to work the fields. So just raw observation. Now, if this is your worldview, the idea of purposelessness would be as absurd to you as saying that the streams have no fish, that there's no such thing as fish, that they don't exist, or that cats don't exist, or that elephants don't exist. Like, this is an absurd thing to say. At least if you believe this worldview, that purpose doesn't exist. What are you talking about? Purpose is just as real as a table, a chair, a cat, or an elephant, or a fish. And on top of this, you have this idea of the one, of God, and the entire world flows, it emanates from God, including purpose. Purpose being an abstraction, a form, directly flows from God. It's a direct emanation of God, and this just kind of seals the deal. It's not only objective and real, purpose and meaning, but the source is the Almighty Lord Himself. Now, if you in this worldview, there's no way for nihilism to even coherently form. It doesn't make sense. Excuse me again. Now, the rediscovery of Aristotle in the 13th century would just crack this open. It would totally split it wide apart. Um, Particularly with actually, I guess the more proper way to say it, that the rediscovery of Aristotle put cracks in this, and Occam is what blew it all apart. Occam is sort of the death knell of Platonism. Um, See, the idea of purpose doesn't fit into Aristotle's philosophy nearly as neatly as it does into Plato's forms. And what I mean there is that um, whereas Aristotle has like the essences of the essence of a cat is sort of his equivalent to Plato's form of a cat. Of course, the only difference being the essence of a cat lives inside of the cat, whereas for Plato, the form of a cat emanates itself into our world to form the cat. Um, yeah, that's a mouthful. So, but there's another major difference in their philosophy in that the idea of purpose does not, it's not just a straight up form. There's no essence of purpose. Or well, I, I guess there sort of is, but it lives in everything with Aristotle. Whereas the essence of a cat does not live inside me or inside the table. The table has the essence of a table. I have the essence of a man, according to Aristotle. So, but instead, the purpose of something is only one of the four causes of it existing. Uh, and all things carry all four of these causes. So it's just part of everything with Aristotle. So Aristotle's four causes are number one, the material cause. The material cause is just the material stuff that the thing is made out of. A rock is made out of, well, rock. It's made out of the hardness of the different minerals that make it up. In today's world, we'd probably include the idea of atoms onto this, or I guess you could say all the ideas of physics in general. So we might say that the air is made up of nitrogen and oxygen, and that's the material cause of the air is the material atoms, material elements, and molecules that it's made out of. That'd be kind of a modern way to say it. Aristotle, of course, wouldn't have said that because these ideas were not around back in his day. But the material cause is just what the material stuff that a thing is made out of. The next is the formal cause, which is the form of the thing, its essence. This is what makes it what it is, and not another thing. Um, which is kind of what we're talking about when we talk about the essence of something. The essence of a cat is catness. You know, that's the formal cause. Number three is the efficient cause, which is the process that the process of change that the thing has to undergo to become what it is. And usually, when we in the modern day, when we talk about cause and effect, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about the efficient cause, like the cause of a. Actually, we also talk about the final cause a lot, which is the fourth one, but the efficient cause is just like the actual process. So like the efficient cause of a bird is an egg, and which hatches into a chicklet, and then the chicklet grows to be a bird. So that's the efficient process of the efficient cause of a bird. Now the final cause is the why the why of its existence. So the why of a table is to place things upon it. The why of a steak is to be eaten. The why we cook a steak is to be eaten. That's the final cause. Now, notice the important part of mentioning all this for Aristotle uh, is that the formal cause, the form, is a completely separate category from the purpose. Like the purpose is the final cause. Um, like purpose is not a form for Aristotle. Like the purpose of why like I said, let's take the table here. The form of the table is the essence of tableness. That's the formal cause. That's the second part. But the final cause of the table is to be able to put stuff upon it. That's the purpose of the table. The purpose of the table is to be able to put things on it. So these are two different things. For Plato, purpose is a form itself, but not Aristotle. The final cause. Now, an important thing to note is that in Aristotle's philosophy, the final cause, the purpose of something, can be scientifically studied just as much as anything else can. So the same pattern that held with Platonic philosophy, that meaning and purpose are like a real objective thing, also holds with Aristotle. But it's not quite the same. Now, finally, we come to Ockham. And Ockham ends 1,800 years of Plato and Aristotle and is what really cracked open the door for nihilism. The original formulation of Occam's razor, which is probably what most people are familiar with when it comes to Ockham, is that one should not proliferate entities beyond what is necessary. Now, in today's world, we've highly generalized this to basically be ceteris paribus. The simplest explanation is to be preferred, which is to say, when all else is equal, the simpler explanation is to be preferred. So if you have two explanations and they both explain things equally effectively, the simpler one is going to be better. You should prefer it. But that wasn't the original form. The original form was one should not proliferate entities beyond what is necessary. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's a direct stab at Plato. Now, I'm going to use maybe a more modern argument, which I came up with this one myself and then discovered that Bertrand Russell had already come up with this one. This is how entities get proliferated beyond what's necessary in Plato. So think of a dog. Well, a dog is going to have the form of dogness, but a dog also has legs. So the dog also has the form of legness. But a dog also has left legs. So there's also the form of left-leggedness. Now, the dog also has front and back legs. So there's also the form of front-leggedness. And then there's also the form of front left-leggedness. And each of those legs has a foot on it. So there is also the form of footness, but also the form of front left footness. And each of those feet has several toes on it. So the leftmost toe on the front leftmost foot of the front leftmost leg of a dog. You see how the abstraction it proliferates. Like you can keep adding more and more specificity. And it's just, where does it end? Where does it end? Because we can go all the way down to each individual atom within the toe of the dog, and each of those is going to have a form associated with it. But once you get down to that level of specificity, it does so well as to just say, that you've proliferated entities just well beyond what's necessary, because you just keep infinitely proliferating them. That's Occam's argument. But then Bertrand Russell's argument is also, on the other side of it, if each individual thing, now if your specificity, if you can bring the specificity down that far to where each individual thing is now having its own form, well, then you've just gotten back to the idea of nominalism, which is what Occam's known for, that only specific things exist. And that, in fact, is what Occam's big idea was nominalism. It's the idea that only specific things exist. Now, today we've kind of also twisted this one, and nominalism today means that abstract ideas are just artifacts of language. It's often contrasted with another idea called conceptualism, of whom the biggest proponent is Immanuel Kant. Conceptualism is the idea that abstract ideas do exist, but they only exist in the mind. They don't exist out there in another plane of existence or in the objects themselves. They're just ideas in the mind, but they do exist there. But for Occam, nominalism was originally just the idea that only specific things exist. Abstractions do not exist at all. But he does go heavily into how they're just basically artifacts of language. So to take an example, catness is not an entity with its own existence, like with Plato, that would be ontological realism, nor is it a real property or an essence of each individual cat, like in Aristotle. It, to Occam, it's just there's nothing real about it at all, except except for perhaps as an idea in the mind, actually, because Occam, confusingly, Occam kind of sits between nominalism and conceptualism. And the first conceptualist probably was Peter Abelard, who predated Occam, but Kant is the most famous proponent. I'm kind of confusing things at this point, but uh, the point is that abstractions don't exist. Okay, that was the point of nominalism. Only individual things exist, and so if you divide things, if you can divide things down to the leftmost toe on the leftmost foot of the frontmost foot on a dog, if you can start breaking things down to that level of specificity, you've just arrived at specific things anyways. Um, but Occam's original, that's a very Bertrand Russell specific argument. Uh, Occam's original argument is you're just proliferating entities beyond what is necessary. You don't need this. This is a very um, this is a very unnecessary model of the world. So this idea, the nominalist idea, is sort of still more or less the modern view. People don't generally go around thinking of say morality as like a real thing, as its own independent entity, or some kind of real property of things, like this water bottle is moral or immoral. we can tell that we can tell that nominalism is more or less the modern view, because people still understand that there's human arbitrariness in just about any concept. In the case of morality, we recognize that different cultures have very different standards of behavior. And often, I mean, not always, there's still pretty strong arguments out there to be made um, for how maybe some moral views are just simply better than others. That's maybe a discussion for another time. But often the differences in behavioral standards are kind of just arbitrary. Whether you celebrate the festival on the 4th of the month or the 12th of the month, uh, there's probably not much moral significance between those two things. But that's often the case, that these sort of behavioral standards are very arbitrary. In fact, we even have a saying to sort of capture some of this, which is, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. You know, capture the pragmatic aspect of this understanding, of this realization. Even more concrete notions, we sort of understand are human created and arbitrary to at least some extent, like that of the idea of a planet. Famously, Pluto, back in what was it, like 2007, 2008, somewhere around there, was designated as not a planet anymore. It's now a dwarf planet, because we had to modify the definition of a planet. And trust me, I know people, well, Pluto's still a planet. You don't want it to be. Because if Pluto was a planet, you'd have to memorize about 30 others or something absolutely absurd once we start looking at all the, the round objects, from Ceres in the asteroid belt to all the stuff that's out in the Kuiper belt. You don't want it to be a planet. just let that one go. I don't want to have to memorize 40 different planets. No, thank you. I'm good. But this is sort of maybe in a way proof of how incorrect Plato was. It's not that it's not that Pluto is an emanation of the form of planets, and now suddenly became an emanation of the form of dwarf planets. That's just kind of ridiculous. Um, it's not that Pluto's essence changed like Aristotle might have it. That it was a planet until the moment that, we declared it a dwarf planet and suddenly it has a different essence to it. No, come on, that's just silly. It's that these concepts of planet and dwarf planet are human created, and while they have reference to something that's maybe a little more objective, the concept itself at least has a human component to it, and we changed the definition of these things for the convenience of ourselves and astronomers, and so Eric doesn't have to learn 40 different planets. Or you'd have to learn all 42, and so would your kid. Yeah, good luck. So Occam then sort of set the stage for the radical skepticism of Rene Descartes, which sort of booted off the modern age of philosophy. And I'm not sure that Occam had a direct influence on Descartes, but I sort of see like the atmosphere of philosophy changing between Occam and Descartes in such a way as uh, to really encourage the sort of inquiry that Descartes did, because if concepts are not all real objective things anymore, like they are with Plato, then the question becomes if any concepts are undoubtable objective things. Is there anything that's objective and undoubtable? And I think Descartes would, of course, go on to famously conclude that his own existence is something that is undoubtable, since the very act of doubting proves his existence. So the idea of existence would perhaps be the one objective and undoubtable thing, or at least one's own existence. Now, of course, Descartes would kick off the modern period, or the Enlightenment period, really. Um, and you'd have, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, and on the rationalist side, and then Bacon, Hobbes, and Locke, and Berkeley, and Hume on the empiricist side. And then these two sides of philosophy would come together in the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. And in trying to answer the skepticism of his predecessor, David Hume, Kant would extend nominalism into encompassing human knowledge as a whole. So now it's not just abstractions, but it's really just human knowledge altogether. Kant's ideas, I would say, are still very much playing out um, in modern philosophy and cognitive science. I'm not sure Kant has really penetrated too much into the non-intellectual world. And when Kant's ideas do penetrate into the non-intellectual world, what you get is something like the modern progressive left, who completely like that's definitely like a very, very far development on Kant's ideas, but it's unrecognizable. It's not Kant anymore. uh, so I kind of I'm more comfortable just saying like Kant has very much penetrated intellectual circles, especially uh, in a sense, Kant almost invented psychology, especially cognitive psychology, cognitive science. Um, I mean, the way we think about those subjects is extremely influenced by Kant. Uh, but I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure that Kant has really penetrated the non-intellectual world as much. Um, but the implications of Kant's philosophy are still playing out very heavily. Anyways, for Kant, like before Kant, people what makes Kant significant is that before Kant, people thought that the mind was just sort of a passive observer of the world, and this knowledge is something the world just sort of hands to us. It just comes in. Um, but after Kant, um, Kant pointed out that the mind is anything but. That the mind starts with what cognitive scientists call top-down processing. Like the mind contains with schemas. Uh, maybe one of the easiest way you can see the mind, you can see what I'm talking about here, is thinking of when you're trying to identify an object. Like you're not sure what it is. Like you look from far away and you're like, I'm not really sure what that thing is. And what your mind is doing is it's taking previous ideas, previous images that it has, and applying them one by one. Is it this? Is it that? Is it A? Is it B? Is it C? And it's applying all these images to what it's seeing and seeing which one matches the best. And so you might say, well, I think it might be this because that's the best match you have. This is something that modern AI does as well. Like when AI does like image processing and tries to identify uh, things in an image, what it's doing um, is it's matching it's matching what's in the image with some schema, with some previously held idea. And so like Kant was sort of the first to recognize this in his idea of the categories, that there's a certain base layer of ideas that um, we have to assume in order to make sense out of anything. And these are very basic ideas, like the idea of object, the idea of space, time, causality. We like our mind just assumes these very basic schemas and applies them to the world in order to make sense of it. Well, it also does this on a less fundamental level. So when you see a cat, you identify that thing as a cat because you have a previous idea in your mind of what a cat is. And so for Kant, this is sort of his equivalent now to the form of a cat, except this form does not exist. It's not like Plato where it's a real thing that exists on a whole other plane. Nothing like that. It's a schema. It's a previous. It's a prior idea that the mind has coming into this situation that it is now applying to the situation. And what makes Kant's theory much more robust than Plato or Aristotle's is that the the the, the schema also is updated through time. So you might think um, um, what's the famous example with birds, that there's no black swans, or that there's no such thing as there's only white swans. There's an example I can't remember. Okay, that's kind of famous in philosophy, where I think it was like over in Europe that the only swans over there were a certain color. I want to say white. But then when they went to other parts of the world, when Europeans started colonizing much of the rest of the world, they found swans of a different color. I think it's something like that. The story goes something like that. And this would be a really great example of before the schema of swan, the form of swan, I guess you could say, in the European mind, was that the swan was white. That's just part of what it meant to be a swan. So when you would see a bird and the bird was white and it had a certain shape and whatnot, the mind would apply this idea, the schema of swan, onto that and identify it as a swan. But the robustness of Kant's account here is that it happens the other way too. There's not only this top-down processing, there's bottom-up processing, because now the idea of a swan can be updated. Whereas in Plato and Aristotle, it kind of goes against the very idea of what it means to be a form. I mean, if God creates the forms or God emanates the forms, you would think these are very objective things. So the form of a swan is like, it seems like it would be sort of there's some sort of immutability to it. I don't know if that is the case in Neoplatonism. I sort of doubt it. I'm probably overstating the case here, but at least there seems to be some sort of rigidity in 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 those ways of thinking about things. like like the essence of or the form of numbers, like to take mathematics for example, the form of numbers doesn't change. It's an immutable, unchanging thing. It's the perfect form of numbers. Well, same thing with swans. The perfect form of swans should always put it this way, because because Plato believed that when we were looking at the forms, it was our mind that was looking into the realm of the forms. Europeans should have had an idea of black swans, right? Even though they had never seen one, if 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 the form of swans included that, and it would have to, because there were black swans in the world, then Europeans should have seen that in the form of swans in their minds. But they didn't. They only saw white swans in their mind until they started exploring the rest of the world. So I think there's a a definite deficiency in the Aristotle's account and Plato's account in this sense, whereas Kant's account is much more robust. We're going to move on. Okay, so a very important thing about Kant, actually. I mean, we're moving on, but this is kind of this is important for what we're moving into now. Um, for Kant, knowledge is not an objective thing like it is for Plato or Aristotle, which is kind of the point I was just trying to address. Knowledge is created. It is a created thing. Uh, this is where we get the whole idea of constructivism today in philosophy. Now, this has been very, very um, this has been taken to places that I think it shouldn't really be taken to. Um, it's kind of massacred the original idea of constructivism, because now you have these idea of social constructivists who think every. Let's get into that. We're going to get into something like that here in a minute, but uh, the important point I should address first is that for Kant, knowledge is something constructed, because our mind starts with these very fundamental assumptions of like space and time, like these very basic forms, um, but also it applies its schemas, its prior ideas onto the world and adjusts them as it goes along. And so knowledge is something that is constantly being updated. It's not an objective static thing like we used to think of. It's something that at least has a human component to it. It's created. But where people really get this messed up is that just because knowledge is created doesn't mean it's arbitrary. That's usually where people want to jump into this. It doesn't mean it's wholly arbitrary. Uh, like Kant, like the categories for Kant, for example, are common among all people: space, time, causality. Uh, all minds, in order to even be a mind at all, so this would also include like the minds of animals or any mind at all, must assume these mental categories of space and time and causality and the like. And so there's not an art. So like knowledge is not arbitrary because we all have these same fundamental assumptions, these fundamental categories that we assume: space, time, and causality and whatnot. And if you doubt this, try to try to argue against the idea of space without assuming an idea of space, and you'll find that it's basically impossible. You can't do it. That's kind of the whole argument that Kant has in the end, um, is that well, a mind wouldn't be a mind without these ideas. So you can challenge the ideas, but you're going to have to employ these ideas. You're going to have to assume these ideas in order to challenge them, because these ideas are just so big. They're what your mind is made of, in a sense. Now, going forward, like you have like the American pragmatists and Darwin. Um, now they would take on a different tack and posit that we create knowledge based on how it's useful. Like for Darwin, it was that knowledge is useful uh, because it's useful to our survival, or the passing on of our genetic material. Um, and of course, the American pragmatists just that was their whole argument, that knowledge is something. Um, Is knowledge is created based on what's useful, which again is not arbitrary, you know, because what useful means is probably something like um, helps us accomplish our will. Like if we desire something, it helps us get what we desire. If we desire to stay away from something or separate ourselves from something, it helps with that. That's what it means for something to be useful. So uh, again, but the point here is that it's not arbitrary. Just because knowledge is created does not mean it's arbitrary. Uh, I think I'm mentioning this because there's this really common idea that people have of every ideological persuasion, whether it's left wing, right wing. The people want to assume that the idea of knowledge being created is the same thing as knowledge being arbitrary. The human beings are just making it up all willy nilly, but it's like that's not the case. There's an organizing principle to it. Just because it's created, just because it's not objective like it is with Plato or Aristotle, doesn't mean it's arbitrary. It doesn't mean that. Um, which I think this is what has led to this very strange idea that knowledge is impossible. Uh, for example, let me give an example of this. Uh, the example of this is the current debate over like sex and gender. I told you we're going to come back to this. Um, like the progressive left wants to say that sex is something biological and that gender is something that's like socially constructed, right? Like it's totally just created and arbitrary. And since gender is socially constructed, there's also like just this arbitrary amount of genders, each with its own arbitrary definition. And now, of course, the right wing comes in. They want to say this is all nonsense, that there's only two genders, and our observation of the natural world proves that this is like some objective thing. And I think both sides are completely wrong for different reasons. I see the left wing as maybe the stranger of the two, as they'll say gender is socially constructed, but then they act like it's personally constructed. Because if something is socially constructed, which knowledge ultimately is, it doesn't mean that every individual gets to define everything for themselves just however they wish, all willy nilly. It means that everyone else also gets a say in the definition just as much. So, which is not something they're going to want to hear. But that's what it means for it to be socially constructed. You know, it's not personally constructed. Like socially constructed means the rest of us get a say. Now, of course, without that agreement, without people agreeing on what something means, or what like people agreeing on knowledge, at least on some level, communication is just going to utterly fail. Um, so up till this moment in history, there's kind of a damn good reason people have agreed that there's only two sexes, you know, male and female. Uh, we've needed a simple way to think about a thing that's very fundamental to our lives, um, and we've sort of just agreed on this uh, because it helps facilitate our society in various ways, and uh, you know it's not arbitrary. Is what I'm saying. There's a reason why people define this as just male and female. Now, like I said, to be fair, I think the right wing is also wrong though. I think they're wrong for their own reasons, and the way they mess up this debate, I think is maybe after this long video essay is maybe a little more familiar to us. They treat sex and gender as like these objective Platonic forms, or maybe Aristotelian essences. They treat it as ontologically objective. But what we understand about these terms, male and female, is certainly something that's subject to change and is at least on some level defined by us humans. You know, it's constructed. So even if we take the sex and gender distinction at face value, with sex being the biological component and gender being the social identity of the person, like the left wants to do, the biological component is also still somewhat arbitrary. It's still somewhat defined by us humans. Um, how do we choose the biological component? Is it based off genitalia? Is it based off chromosomes? How about the capability of bearing children? Well, I mean, each of these definitions might sound reasonable at first glance, but once you look at them a little closer, you can see that there's definitely problems with each of these definitions. If we go by a person's genitalia, well, what do we think about hermaphrodites? What do we think about eunuchs? you know, Very different story. There's a problem with that definition. How about if we go off chromosomes? Well, there's some rare genetic abnormalities. Can't fully define it off of that. And how about well, what about the capability of bearing children? We can base it on that. Well, no, because not all females are fertile. You know, Especially late in life, they go through menopause and they can no longer have children. So it's what we ultimately base the definition on is still like the idea of sex is that it's not a Platonic form. It's at least somewhat socially defined on some level, but it's not as far as the left wants to say, where it's now personally defined and completely arbitrary, and we can say whatever we want. Both sides are wrong. Now, to be fair, I can see why the right wing sort of takes the view it does, because it sees the left's redefinitions and that the left makes it like very arbitrary as an attempt to control the way people think. And I don't think that's wholly inaccurate for the right to accuse the left of that. And so the right just wants to kind of take the view of cutting off any possibility of manipulating language to control thinking in this way. And taking such a view sort of necessitates going back to thinking of this as like an objective thing. Um, Plus, saying it that way is a very simplified, a very simple way of explaining this idea to people, uh, so that it's not an hour and a half essay like this. But I think if the right was maybe a little less stubborn on this, it would realize that this return to pre-Occam thinking is unnecessary, because for the reasons I gave, the left wing is just as wrong on this issue. They treat knowledge as completely arbitrary, completely made up by humans, and based solely on representing and expressing power structures, and that's just nonsense. That's just not the case. Knowledge is constructed. It's definitely something that does have a human component about it, but there are organizing principles other than power, which inform the way that we construct knowledge. In fact, it's extremely doubtful that power is even the central or dominant organizing principle. I would say I'd probably get a little Schopenhauerian about it and say that will is the predominant principle. We want something, and so we construct knowledge based on how easy it is to get it. And power is over other people is only one of the very, very many things that people want. So, uh, so I think at this point we have a pretty adequate view of how nihilism was even made possible. Whereas back in like the medieval times, but it would be before Occam, uh, and really for quite a bit of time after Occam, because academic ideas don't always penetrate into the public conscious for a long time. Uh, we could see how in Plato or Aristotle, things like purpose and meaning were very objective. It wouldn't even make sense for nihilism to enter these worldviews, because nihilism is just to say that there is no such thing as objective meaning. Like, it doesn't make sense under Plato or Aristotle, because you know abstractions are objective things to Plato and Aristotle. Now, I want to say a few words on Nietzsche here, and I'm skipping a lot of history between Kant and Nietzsche. There's Fichte and Hegel, Schopenhauer, and of course Nietzsche was in no small part reacting to Schopenhauer. Now, I see a lot of Christians, particularly conservative Christians, really conservatives as a whole, like politically, they want to characterize Nietzsche as a nihilist, and I think this is kind of weird because um, when Christians do this in particular, I usually tongue in cheek, I usually turn around and accuse them of being Satanists. Because if Nietzsche is a nihilist, then in the same way Christians are Satanists. Because uh, the, I think calling Nietzsche a nihilist is making a mistake, is making a confusion between descriptive and normative. Like when you're saying something descriptively, you're just giving a description of how the world is, uh, which is the contrast with saying something normatively, which is to say how the world should be. So a descriptive statement might be saying something like, "That man assaulted the woman over there." Well, I'm not saying that that man should have assaulted the woman over there. That'd be speaking normatively. In fact, I'm not even saying that man shouldn't have assaulted the woman over there. That would also be speaking normatively. I'm speaking descriptively. I'm saying the man did assault the woman over there. It has nothing to do with whether he should have or shouldn't have. I'm just giving a description of what happened. Um, and I think this confusion is what's happening when Christians and conservatives, especially, or really a lot of people do. I'm kind of picking on Christians and conservatives because they seem to be the most guilty of this. They characterize Nietzsche as a nihilist, and this isn't really fair to Nietzsche because while Nietzsche certainly was a descriptive nihilist, like he described the world as having no objective purpose, no objective meaning. He was definitely not a normative nihilist. His entire philosophy is about combating nihilism, combating the fact of nihilism. And and like I said, when a Christian particularly accuses Nietzsche of being a nihilist, and I see it all the time. Maybe sometime I'll dig up a video of Christians doing this. I accuse them of being a Satanist. I accuse them of being a Satanist because, in the same way, they are a descriptive Satanist without being a normative Satanist. Because typically Christians believe that Satan is a real existing entity. They are describing what they see as the objective fact of the world, that Satan exists, but they don't normatively think that you should follow Satan or his philosophy or that Satan should exist or that Satan is a good thing. you know so in the same way that Nietzsche is a nihilist, which is just descriptively, not normatively, a Christian is a Satanist, descriptively, not normatively. But anyways, this rather turning into a rather long essay here, but our brief, it's still a brief history of philosophy, if a long essay. Our brief history of philosophy here has finally, I think, brought us to Nietzsche in his famous declaration that God is dead and we killed him. Now, it's taken all this to kind of fully grok what Nietzsche means by this. This declaration of the age of nihilism and how significant it really is. Because in the 1800 years of Plato being dominant and meaning and purpose being real objective entities that were created by and emanated from the Almighty, from the One, Occam's nominalism is what ended that. It ended that worldview. Now only specific things exist. Only each individual cat exists. Each individual elephant, each individual person exists. Occam was the beginning of the end. And then once we get to Nietzsche, there's no more objective meaning or purpose handed to us by the One. God is dead by Nietzsche's time. There's no form of meaning or purpose anymore. We don't think in those terms. There's no forms at all, in fact. And thus the master form, God, the One, is not even necessary to explain the origin of abstract ideas in the first place. In other words, all that's left is the truth of nihilism. There's no meaning or purpose in the world at all. This also means that there's no such thing as justice or goodness in the world at all either. These are not real objective things. They're just made up by people. Um, I guess I could wrap this up with by addressing one loose end, and that's sort of the shift into materialism in the present day. I think it's very um, I think it's very tied into nihilism. I think it's a short jump. Like meaning and purpose are very abstract, higher order concepts, but things like hunger, pain, pleasure, these are not higher order concepts. They're very direct. Uh, like we can wax philosophical about our place in the universe and our meaning, but no one will ever deny the simple power that pain and pleasure have over our conscious. You know, being in pain sort of grips us and catches our attention like nothing else. And those who deny their physical pleasure, those who deny their physical pleasures, their sort of more animal side, their id in Freudian terms, uh, are almost all always ascetics of some religious order of some sort, monks, nuns, priests, that sort of thing. In other words, to them, there's some higher purpose, some meaningful context that helps ground their self denial. Like monks and nuns are more than anyone else moving contrary to uh, the rest of the world, which is constantly in pursuit of fulfilling their will. Um, but since that sense of purpose is so easy to question in today's world, that it's not an objective thing. The only thing we seem to take as real anymore are what's left, which is those physical pains and pleasures. You know, our everyday material desires. It's kind of all that we're left with as far as undeniable guides for living our lives, if purpose and meaning are going to be there to be objective things. So I think this sets a psychologically fertile ground for people to adopt materialism as an epistemology as well as a sort of governing ethics for their lives. Um, I think this is kind of changing though. Uh, I don't see it lasting. People really hunger for meaning and purpose. Uh, I don't know how things are going to look going forward, but I, I I don't think the modern left or right are going to win. Like the right can't really win because it's going backwards. Like the cat's out of the bag. You're not going to be able to return to some sort of Neoplatonism. It's not going to happen. Um, and the left, I don't think is going to win because it's like the left is trying hard to make fighting for your identity to be its own like sort of pseudo religion, pseudo philosophy, pseudo purpose. But it's clear to too many people that that's just like a sort of mindless ego indulgence that's ultimately very unfulfilling. Uh, so I don't think the left or the right are ultimately going to win. I think there'll be some kind of third option. But holy cow, this went on a lot longer than I thought it would. Holy cow! Um, what a first recording. It's I'm glad you joined me. If you want more of this type of content, this is more along the lines of the longer form content. Um, I based what I had to say here on an article I wrote some years ago. Um, in fact, that was basically my notes. Was the article itself, and I'm glad you joined me. If you want more of this type of content, please subscribe. Like I said, I'm gonna also do maybe on a more daily basis. I'll do more direct, lighter React content where I examine the arguments people are making in political spaces, or maybe even like philosophical stuff people might be saying that usually probably be pseudo philosophical stuff. We'll examine. But this is definitely an example of the longer form content I want to do going forward in this channel. So if you liked it and you want to see more, subscribe. My name's Eric Westfall. Today is my 40th birthday. Um, and I just spent almost an hour and 45 minutes talking about stuff that I like to talk about. So how cool is that? Thank you.